Hi, so I'm going to be talking about the history of Stonewall to the best of my ability, just because not only am I not an expert about really any of these topics, I just do my own research, try my best, but also because there is a lot of misinformation when it comes to the history of Stonewall, and a lot of different rumors that you hear, and not all of them are necessarily accurate. So basically, it's the 1960s in New York City, and the climate is very hostile towards queer people, and there's also kind of not that much community established. And it wasn't like it was only New York City that had pride events or that had riots or protests, but Stonewall is considered a major catalyst in terms of the queer liberation movement, because it was the cause for how the Gay Liberation Front formed. And the Gay Liberation Front is basically a bunch of queer rights organizations that came together into this larger unit together, and really how we ended up with a lot of the rights and normalization of queer people that we have today. So back to New York City in the 1960s, bars became these areas where queer people could be a little bit more themselves, and they were seen as as these places of refuge. But the thing is that the New York State liquor authorities penalized and shut down any establishments that served alcohol to queer people, because it was completely illegal to be queer, specifically at the time, because they didn't really think of other kinds of queer people. If you're gay and you're suspected to be gay, they would shut down the establishment if you were served alcohol. And so it was completely illegal, because the gathering of queer people was seen as disorderly, and it was illegal to show any quote-unquote gay behavior, meaning you couldn't hold hands, kiss, or even dance with someone that would look like the same sex as you. The police would typically target any of these bars that seemed to be associated with this gay behavior. So what made Stonewall different, and why was it so popularized? Why do we know it today? Stonewall was popularized as a safer bar, and it's actually due to mafia involvement, which is really interesting. So the mafia saw that all these bars were being targeted if they were associated with gay people. So they thought, I can make a profit off of this. They would renovate these bars in Greenwich Village, and they would make them into these gay bars. And the reason that they were safer was because the mafia would pay off the police so that the police wouldn't really bother them. And if they were going to raid the bar, they would typically now they had this space where queer people could go to, that they would know if it was about to be raided, and the bar could stay open. And actually, most of the gay bars in that area of Greenwich ended up being owned by the mafia. So Stonewall became this place that LGBTQI plus people could be themselves. They could dance with each other, socialize with each other, without that same worry over their heads that they used to. It was very communal. It was also a really big place, cheap to get into, accepting, and it was even a place that a lot of homeless queer youth would go into for shelter in the night, because it was so big. Now, it's not necessarily the perfect place, because when you are a marginalized group and the mafia is monopolizing all the safe bars that you can go to, they can manipulate the situation to their advantage. They knew that they could blackmail people, or they could raise prices, and no one could do anything about it. And it also means that their drinks were watered down, there were broken pipes. It's not necessarily the nicest or most perfect place, but it was what they had, and people make the best of what they get. It was because of that sense of community and that sense of safety that queer people couldn't really have access to otherwise, even if it was not perfect. So then what happened at Stonewall that caused this riot? What happened? Well, on June 28th, 1969, Stonewall was unexpectedly raided. And before, they would always get the tips of that police were coming, and they would expect it and be able to plan accordingly. But this time, they were not able to. So then these police start to violently arrest people, specifically for violating the quote-unquote gender-appropriate clothing statute, meaning that whatever their gender appears to be, they seem to be wearing the clothes that are just wrong for that gender. And that means that officers could actually take suspected cross-dressing patrons into the bathroom to check their sex. So people were so fed up with the constant harassment from police and from the discrimination and oppression that they had faced their entire lives. So they start to fight back. They're like, enough is enough. They start to throw pennies and bottles. There are even some accounts of people throwing martini glasses, shot glasses, and even bricks. It's actually very common that you hear that people threw bricks, but apparently there weren't really bricks to throw. It was mostly stones, just things that people could find on the ground that they were throwing. police are trying to arrest people, but it's just not working because within minutes this becomes a full-blown riot. And what some people that were there called a rebellion, this lasted for six full days. It wasn't 6 full days of them just of these people throwing things at police. It was the rioting, it was protests with sometimes thousands of people coming out to support and walk in the streets. It is considered a huge catalyst within the movement around the country and around the world. Even though it wasn't the first, it was important.